Okay, so squad is what's called a platoon scale tactical shooter. That's because the teams are composed of 50 players, which is a number that roughly corresponds to what a real world platoon would have, if a little bit larger than typical, especially if we consider that military units are rarely at 100% manning levels. Squad can also be called a platoon scale shooter because the primary unit of maneuver that the players are using is the squad, with the highest levels of command and control occurring one level above, aka the platoon. Now, the specific way that a team can organize itself in squad is very freeform with endless permutations, but ultimately you do want some sort of coherent structure to everything so that every component of the force has a defined job to do, and everything is working towards the unified effort of the whole, which is to win. So even if every game and team and the structure of such will be different, having a concept of the typical structure of a team can be useful to better understand squad's gameplay. So how do we do that? Now, a natural route to take when considering this question would be to take a look at how real-world militaries are structured and operate at this level and see how that reflects in squad. However, there are key differences between the demands of real-world platoon operations and the platoon scale battles that we have in squad, with corresponding implications for platoon structure and the nature of the fights. Obviously, this is a freaking video game. So in this video, we're going to do two things. We're going to look at the real world US Army's infantry rifle platoon, how it's organized, why it's organized that way, and what some of the key capabilities it brings to the battlefield are. Then I'm going to lay out some of the different demands that the environment of squad's gameplay has on that group of 50 guys, what they need to accomplish on the battlefield, the gameplay considerations, and their implications. Then I'm going to lay out what a typical 50-player team looks like in the game so that you can have a better understanding of your place within the big picture. And for fun, we're also going to look at what kinds of parallels we can see between 50-player teams in squad and a real-life rifle platoon. Bottom line is that this video is mostly me nerding about two different subjects that I really like and smashing them together. Again, for fun, because I can. Like, comment, subscribe, and enjoy. If you're watching this video, the chances are that you might already have a passing familiarity with how infantry units are organized. You would generally know that a US Army rifle platoon has 3 rifle squads, or line squads, each composed of 9 men. These are the main maneuver units of the platoon that do most of the fighting. And although this is the textbook organization of the squad, it's notable that its precise composition can have variations depending on what's called the MET-TC. That stands for Mission, Enemy, Terrain, Troops, Time Available, and Civilian Considerations. I think the weather is supposed to be somewhere in there too, but I forget. This is just the military's fancy way of saying the situation. It all depends on the situation. So in the US Army's case, possible variations include having a squad designated marksman, or SDM, who is intended to be a rifleman, but with added precision capabilities at your typical short and medium engagement ranges using something like an M110A1 SDMR. Note that doctrinally, he's not supposed to be a squad sniper that engages at long range or even operates with semi-autonomy. This role is about precision. He's just a rifleman, but better. And it's a role that's highly likely to be rendered obsolete as the new XM7 service rifle proliferates throughout the Army. That gun is a topic for another day. The squad may also have 1 or 2 combat lifesavers, or CLSs, who are basically medic lights that are intended to help keep any combat casualties alive until more specialized personnel, like the platoon medic, can treat them. You may have noticed that the rifle squad on paper has no anti-tank soldiers in it. This isn't because the US Army doesn't have squad-level anti-tank. Rather, it's because they issue out single-shot disposable AT-4s, which are considered munitions, not weapon systems, for use by the squads as needed according to the MET-TC. Using single-shot disposable anti-tank weapons at the squad level has a lot of advantages compared to using a dedicated reloadable weapon. Theoretically, you have the flexibility to have half the squad carry AT-4s if you're fighting something like a Russian tank battalion, or you could be completely unburdened by their cumbersome weight if your enemy is composed purely of light infantry. The purpose of this setup is to be super flexible when all is said and done. I do want to go more in depth about the rifle squad in a future video, so we're going to move on. Bringing in the heavy firepower for the rifle platoon is the weapons squad, also composed of 9 men and led by a squad leader. But unlike the rifle squads, the weapons squad is composed of 4 two-man weapons teams, 2 of which are medium machine gun teams manning M240 7.62mm machine guns, while 2 teams man either the Javelin close combat missile system or an 84mm M3E1 multi-role anti-armor, anti-personnel weapon system, or MAWS, again, depending on the MET-TC. Soldiers tend to call this thing the Goose. Rounding out the textbook strength of a rifle platoon is the platoon headquarters, which consists of the platoon leader, the platoon sergeant, and platoon RTO, or radio telephone operator. They provide the leadership of the platoon, as well as communications with higher and lower echelon units. One thing to note is that this bare bones, neat little package of a platoon table of organizational equipment, or TONE, does not reflect how the platoon would be organized for a fight, which would again depend largely on the MET-TC. Habitual attachments that a rifle platoon can expect to have for combat include a forward observer and a forward observer RTO for calling in artillery and mortar fire, as well as a combat medic to provide tactical combat casualty care, or TCCC. I don't know if there's a slang term for that, so US Army dudes, let me know down in the comments. Both the Forward Observer Team, or FO team, and the medic are technically attached from higher headquarters, although in practice they do tend to become part of the platoon. Another aspect not reflected in the textbook TONE is vehicles. The U.S. Army Infantry Rifle Platoon of the Infantry Brigade combat teams does not have vehicles organically assigned to it, but the reason for such is not due to a lack of equipment or that they don't have access to them. It's for flexibility. Again, depending on the MET-TC, the platoon may indeed be on foot, or it may be equipped with JTLVs, which themselves can bring heavy firepower in the form of machine guns and automatic grenade launchers, or they may be equipped with those new ISVs that the 82nd Airborne got. The platoon could also be mounted in trucks, be heliborne, or I guess even equipped with boats in some niche circumstances. The point is that by not organically assigning them vehicles, they have the flexibility to be mounted in any alternate form of transportation that may be needed for the mission at hand. That said, the Army Rifle Platoon may be part of a Stryker unit, which would have their rifle platoons equipped with Stryker infantry carrier vehicles that come with an additional 2 men per vehicle to act as driver and commander. In mechanized infantry companies, the rifle platoon would be equipped with Bradley fighting vehicles. Due to the heavy firepower of the Bradleys and also their limited carrying space of just 7 passengers and 3 crew, a mechanized infantry platoon does not have a separate weapons squad, but it does retain the M240s and Javelins within the Bradleys for use by the rifle squads whenever required by the MET-TC. In both Stryker and mechanized units, the vehicles are grouped into a separate mounted element that can act in concert with the dismounted element of the rifle platoon. In U.S. Army doctrine, the mounted element is typically led by the platoon sergeant, while the platoon commander controls the dismounted element. So an important observation to have here is that the infantry platoon is rarely just the infantry, it's the vehicles too. And this is extra true when you look at other militaries around the world, which generally have some sort of motorization or mechanization for their infantry, unless the formation is specialized for something like amphibious or air assault or airborne or alpine operations. Or the military might just be poor and they don't have the money. For a lot of these other militaries, the vehicles will be organic to the rifle platoon. Why isn't it the case for the Army? Well, it's because they need strategic flexibility for power projection overseas with their infantry units. The real-world rifle platoon is meant to operate as a singular whole, with its constituent elements fighting a unified fight in mutual support. I think there's been a trend in popular culture to think of the squad as like the basic unit of infantry, but I think it's more realistic to say that it's actually the platoon. The platoon is also meant to fight as part of a larger unit in a larger battle, that of the company and the battalion. As a result, a platoon's capabilities are actually never complete without the support of these higher echelons and beyond. For example, unit logistics and supply is typically handled at the company level. If you spend any amount of time looking at tables of organization and equipment, you'll notice that companies have a supply truck, but platoons don't. The platoon will also rarely fight without the support of 60mm mortars from the company, 81mm mortars from the battalion, as well as TOWs, HMGs, and AGLs from the weapons company, which are all assets regularly made available to the rifle platoon. Okay, cool. So why am I spending all of this time talking in detail about the organization of a US Army rifle platoon? Well, it's not because I'm trying to get into the nitty-gritty details of its organization, how many people are where, and what weapon system is there. Rather, what I would like you to do is conceptualize this platoon as having a set of capabilities, which are provided by each of its components and attachments in a specific way. So let's look at the line rifle squads. They provide the bulk of the platoon's fighting manpower, also called the bayonet strength, able to maneuver, close with, and destroy the enemy to take and occupy territory. They're the main maneuver capability of the platoon, of which it has 3. The weapons squad provides specialized heavy firepower. So the machine guns enable the platoon to lay down a high volume of sustained automatic fire as its main base of fire. We talked about fire and maneuver tactics in this channel a lot. At the platoon scale, that is how you get suppression. The squad's javelin teams provide a heavy anti-armor capability. The Carl Gustavs, if used, are a bit more flexible, able to contribute to the base of fire with high explosive rounds, or serve as an alternative, lighter anti-armor capability. The platoon HQ, with the habitual attachments, provides command and control, heavy external fire support, and medical support. The platoon's vehicle component, if it exists, which again, I want you to think of as an integral part of the platoon in most cases, provides mobility to the infantry and also acts as a way to field heavy firepower and enhanced logistical capabilities to carry more stuff like spare weapons and ammo. In addition, the full capabilities of a platoon cannot be assessed without including what is made available from the company level and higher. For example, logistics. The platoon doesn't have that capability organically, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have it. It's always provided by the company HQ. Same with indirect fire support, which is provided from company and battalion mortars, and even armored support, as the platoon could have a tank or 2 attached to it by the US Army's system of task organization. So it's this basic set of capabilities: maneuver, machine gun base of fire, anti-tank, command and control, fire support, medical, logistics, vehicles, that I want you to see the platoon as projecting on the battlefield. Forget about the specific organization. Okay, that's cool, you might think. But Squad, the video game, doesn't work like this with these neat little tables of organization and equipment. How does this entire video to this point relate to the game? And you'd be right. Despite being composed of a similar number of people, a full team in Squad does not function in the same way that a real-world rifle platoon does. So in this section, I'm going to briefly cover what I think are the reasons for this, and then we're going to get to the gameplay side of things. So first in my list of big 3 reasons is the fact that unlike in real life, the platoon level, the tier of organization directly above the squad, is the highest level of organization possible in the game. So if you recall all the capabilities that we talked about that are provided to the platoon from outside the platoon, those are key capabilities that it needs for war. But because in Squad we don't have that company or battalion level of organization, all of those capabilities have to exist at the platoon level, which then inflates the amount of things that a group of 50 people has to do on the battlefield. So logistics, mortars, TOWs, HMGs are all managed at the platoon level in Squad. An extreme example of this is medical. In real life, what typically happens to a combat casualty is that he is given immediate self or buddy aid. Then the fire team or squad CLS will take care of him while he's brought to a platoon casualty collection point or CCP by an aid and litter team, where the platoon medic will treat him until he can be evac'd to the battalion aid station. In Squad, the game just combines the capabilities of an award-winning research hospital and Jesus Christ himself into a single superhuman entity known as the medic. This man can not only prevent people from dying, but he can fully restore their bodies back to 100% combat capability, and you get 2 of them per squad. So the entirety of a whole country's worth of medical capability is flattened down to the fire team level in this game. It's an example of a gameism that subverts what a platoon-sized unit should be capable of, but is necessary for gameplay reasons. But my point is, in Squad, the platoon is getting capabilities that would typically require higher echelons of organization in real life. because this game just doesn't model those higher levels. In video game land, these 50 guys have to be totally self-reliant with all of the capabilities that it implies. The second major difference between real life and squad is that in the game, you have extremely large areas of operation, or AOs, for what is a mere platoon-sized unit. This means that whereas in the real world, a platoon would fight together as a unified whole within a local area, in squad, the platoon has to fight dispersed to cover these huge maps with many of its subordinate units operating independently. In terms of gameplay design, that's what makes this game squad-centric rather than platoon-centric, because when the platoon-sized team is dispersed like this, the typical unit that will act as the basic piece you move around the map is the squad or a squad equivalent like a vehicle. And ultimately what that does is it creates a dynamic where rather than being a tactical headquarters that's worried about coordinating maneuver and fires between cooperating squads to win firefights, the platoon level of command and control is more of an operational headquarters. It's more worried about distributing units to the right locations on the map to get them to the right fights. It's also worried about the logistics of getting those units around the map and sustaining them with supplies and manpower by creating fobs where you can stockpile ammo, build, and create spawn points for players. That is the operational level of war sitting between the tactical and strategic. Because the platoon headquarters is operational, not tactical, it needs to have assets like logistics trucks and helicopters to conduct rear area operations, and it also needs backline squads to conduct deep operations in the enemy's rear and disrupt their operational capabilities. In the real world, these are elements that would be the realm of divisions, corps, and above, with the platoon just focused on the immediate tactical fight. So the fact that squad is an operational game at its highest level of strategy is a key defining trait of its gameplay that I think a lot of people don't understand when they're first starting. The third and final difference between real-life platoons and squad gameplay is that in squad, command and control, C2, is super democratized. Going back to my description of a real-world platoon's capabilities, notice that everyone, especially everyone in the headquarters, was specialized with a defined role to play. The platoon leader is the unquestioned commander. The platoon sergeant leads the mounted element, if there is one. The FO calls in the fire support. The squad leaders lead their squads. It's not like that in the game. Most teams in this game, even in super organized 50-man scrimmage teams, have a highly decentralized leadership structure where everyone is wearing multiple hats, filling in multiple roles rather than being specialized. The squad leaders double as a platoon command committee where they discuss and decide what to do at the operational level together, even as they're leading their squads in the tactical firefights. And usually what that means is that most squad leaders end up focusing on the more important operational aspect of squad strategy because they don't have the bandwidth to also be coordinating the tactical level to win the firefights. They just leave that to the individuals. There is a commander role in squad, but his defining trait is the ability to call in artillery and airstrikes and do a little bit of aerial reconnaissance with the UAV, meaning that he's mainly just another squad leader, but with the capabilities of a FO or a JTAC smashed into him. The current commander role in squad does not have sufficient unique gameplay elements to allow or enable him to act as the operational commander for the squad leaders. So clearly, squad is very different from real life in terms of how units are structured and function at the platoon level. But let's think back to our discussion earlier about how the platoon is ultimately a means of putting certain capabilities into the battlefield. And if we think of it that way, we can begin to make sense of how a team and squad is structured to bring those very same capabilities to the virtual battlefield. In general, you can group the various squads you can create in the game into 5 categories: infantry squads, vehicle squads, aviation squads, mortar squads, and backline squads. First, we gotta cover the standard 9-man rifle squad, of which a team will typically have 4, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, but usually 4 of. This is the backbone of the team, providing its primary maneuver capability as the dismounted element of the platoon. However, in squad, they will also have additional augmenting capabilities depending on what unique enablers they have, namely specialist kits, logistics trucks, combat vehicles, and the commander role. Let me explain how each of these augments the basic rifle squad. Again, I'm going to save the specifics of squad composition for a later video, but I do want to talk about specialist kits, namely machine gunners, hats and snipers, and their place in the line rifle squads. Combat engineers I will discuss in a second. Unlike the other kits, specialist kits are generally limited to 2 per team, meaning that they're not just providing a key capability for the squad, but for the team as a whole. Specialist kits are also limited to 1 of each per squad, which forces them to be distributed throughout the different squads. Let's talk about the machine gun kit. We discussed machine guns earlier in the section about real-world weapon squads and how they provide the main base of fire capability for the platoon. Now, unfortunately, in squad's current state, I do think that the machine gun has been neutered into a kit that doesn't really provide that huge of a capability and is largely optional. This is a conversation for another video, but in short, I think the devs made a mistake in that they're treating and balancing the machine gun like it's a personal firearm, like a rifle, when it really should be seen and balanced as a powerful asset for the team as a whole, kind of like the hat kit is, specialized for laying down a heavy volume of sustained automatic firepower. In theory, a machine gun kit in squad would help to provide that capability, not just to the squad it's in, but to the team as a whole. Speaking of hats, they provide the primary anti-armor capability for the team and stand out among the specialist kits as the only one providing an absolutely necessary capability for the majority of matches. Obviously, it depends on the situation. If you're fighting the insurgent light infantry unit, it's not as important. But some hat kits, like the Canadians, can fire HE shells, which remain useful even without a heavy armor threat. Snipers, I think, are a good precision fire asset, but don't seem to offer a unique capability to the team as a whole beyond the ability to just kill lots of enemies from a far distance. And they also aren't present for every faction. In the real world, they have a role as intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets, otherwise known as ISR, but sadly, there's not much room for that capability in squad in its current state, even with the operational gameplay element. I think the kit needs to have more things that it can do that are unique to it alone for that to become a thing. The commander role gives a squad an FO JTAC capability, so whichever squad has it will be responsible for the team's heavy fire support. The logistics truck provides the ability to place radios and construct fobs, so the squads that are riding in one must be cognizant of and be ready to provide that ability to their team when it's necessary. As I mentioned before, a team will generally have 4 or so line rifle squads. In this game, these squads share a mix of different key weapons and support capabilities distributed amongst them, which impacts the specific role that a squad will play. Consequently, weapon squads and headquarters don't exist in the squad in its current state. Again, those are capabilities that are distributed amongst the line rifle squads. Anyways, aside from the team's main infantry component, there's also the rest of the team we should talk about. The vehicles, the helicopters, the mortars, and the components of the team arising from squad's operational gameplay, namely backline squads. In contrast to the line rifle squads, vehicle squads specialize in crewing armored fighting vehicles, fielding their capability to act as the mounted element of the team. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. These are the squads running the MBTs, the MGSs, and IFVs, but there are also very often dedicated squads crewing APCs or even light vehicles. They provide heavy firepower and mobility to the infantry if you can carry passengers. They also provide infantry with the ability to rearm off of the onboard ammo, or in the case of some IFVs and APCs, the ability to switch kits off of the vehicle if they need a different capability. That sounds a lot like how the Bradleys in a real-world mechanized infantry platoon carry spare M240s and javelins for the rifle squads to use if needed. Note that sometimes you will have hybrid rifle vehicle squads when you run something like a mech infantry squad, which will combine the two capabilities and not necessarily specialize in one or the other. Next, you have the aviation squads. Now, I am placing helicopters in a separate category from ground vehicles because they're ultimately a vehicular asset that's less integrated with the rest of the team and operates on a big picture level. They focus more on transportation, logistics, and reconnaissance than combat, meaning that they play a greater role in squad's operational gameplay rather than the tactical. However, that is starting to change now with the introduction of CAS helicopters like the WPMC's Little Bird, but close air support would still fall under aviation, providing heavy fire support for the team at the operational level, supporting different tactical fights across the map depending on what the priorities of the team are. In that sense, cast squads are similar to our next type of squad, mortar squads. Now, these are the guys that primarily play around operating mortars, self-explanatory. Mortars are unique even among the heavy weapons emplacements because unlike HMGs or TOWs, they are very general purpose, with their usefulness not dependent on the situation. There's rarely a reason to not have them, and there's always a useful thing that they can contribute to the team. It's also one of those weapon systems that's best employed by a dedicated group of players, whereas TOWs and HMGs can and usually are manned by one of the line rifle squads that are occupying a static position within a fob. The mortar squads provide the team with an indirect fire support capability that's highly responsive and always on call. However, they're not integrated into the line rifle squads, or rather they shouldn't be, and operate one level higher. They shift their support between the different tactical fights happening on the map depending on the priorities of the operational context. This is another difference between mortars and other heavy weapons emplacements. TOWs or HMGs are emplacements that support the local tactical fight that they're positioned to be involved in and aren't capable of fighting at squad's operational level, unless you're a TOW that's decided to become bootleg air defense as you commonly see. And finally, we have those squads composed of smaller 3 to 5 man groups that take on specific roles like fob hunting and, when the server rules allow it, main camping. These squads are set apart in that their primary role is to help the team by playing around enemy fobs and logistics rather than directly fighting on the objectives. So their perspective is more on the map-wide operational effects they can have rather than the tactical fights the line squads will be focused on. They're running around in the enemy's rear, hunting their radios, ambushing enemy vehicles, so it's very common for them to run a combat engineer kit to destroy radios more effectively with the C4 and engineer shovel, and also the mines can be used to disrupt the enemy's rear area supply routes, and hat kits are also very common for the ability to quickly destroy enemy vehicles. So as you can see, how a team of 50 players is organized and functions in squad is very different from a real-world infantry rifle platoon. Obviously, it's a video game. All of these differences come down to gameplay and game design reasons, such as the highest echelon of organization being the platoon level, which must control what would normally be higher level assets, in addition to the regular platoon suite of capabilities. The need to operate dispersed over a large AO rather than as a single tactical unit, which introduces operational gameplay to squad on top of the tactical. And finally, the democratic nature of command and control in a video game that is played for fun to allow for player agency and choice to matter. I know, shock and horror, how dare people have fun in this game. That said, when you break down the capabilities that are being fielded by a real-world platoon and its supporting attachments to the battlefield, there are pretty striking parallels between it and what a team of 50 squad players bring to the virtual battlefield. In most cases, things are just arranged differently, again to allow for player choice, or in the case of some things like the medical system, to enable constant action on the front lines. I think it speaks to the fact that squad is ultimately a game first that grew out of making Battlefield into a hardcore experience and a milsim second. So when you play squad, it's important to learn to play the game of squad. That said, when you take a second to zoom in a little bit, you will find that there is still plenty of room for authentic tactical coordination between squads, fire teams, and players in the local firefights that break out across the map. That is where there is room for milsim gameplay to take place, as long as it's focused on the practical side of winning the fights using tactics and coordination. Really, the hard part is putting in the effort to learn those tactics and then practicing and developing the cohesion with the group of players to put those tactics into practice. And ultimately, that's what my channel is focused on. It's about teaching those tactics to players so that they have the tools they need to put them into practice if they so desire. So anyways, I hope you found this to be an entertaining, thought-provoking, and maybe a slightly educational video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you did. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.